Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Superintelligence. So what Superintelligence is essentially about is we center on the character of Carol, not Carol Baskin, Carol Peters, and she is basically seen as like the most average person on Earth, and she works in this she's like a corporate executive at some place, and one day there is this new device that basically decides to take it under his wing. It talks like James Corden for some reason, and basically she has to do what she can to save it from, to save everyone from this device going corrupt and destroying the world, while also simultaneously trying to save other key relationships. And that's really all I'm going to say. Superintelligence. Look, I was pretty much dreading this film. We get films like this every single year that Melissa McCarthy does. They're usually with her husband that just look really dumb and unappealing, and unfortunately this seemed like this was going to be that film, but especially the fact, and I've talked about this before, this was a film that was supposed to go to theaters before the pandemic was a thing. And for some reason, they decided, nope, it's got to come onto a streaming service. And any time that happens, that is not usually a great sign, because that's a sign that they just don't think that the film is going to interest audiences enough to play in theaters. Again, barring a pandemic. This was before they knew that was even a thing. This is when they decided to move it. This was one of the first things they decided to do on HBO Max. So knowing that, I was very much not looking forward to it. Then the trailer came out, and it was every bit as obnoxious as I really was expecting, and I finally have seen it, and I will say, this is a much different film than I was expecting, but it's still a really unfunny and surprisingly very disjointed comedy that I just think really fails in many areas to leave any kind of impact, but we're just gonna get into it right now, starting off with the cast. And I will say right now, that's actually one of the better things about this movie. If there is one thing I will say, is that I think the cast here is actually not that bad for the most part. Melissa McCarthy is someone that I do think is legitimately very talented. I think when she has the right role, she does a good job. And what I liked about her in this movie is that she's actually not playing a bumbling idiot. Carol Peters is a lot more subdued. She's a little bit more... She feels more like a human character, and I think McCarthy does a good job with that for what she has, and I guess, I was impressed by her, and I guess the same with Bobby Cannavale. He didn't annoy me either. I thought he did a good job for what he had in this film. I wasn't too annoyed by him. I thought he did an alright job. I will say, though, the chemistry between these two is really not there. We're supposed to... A lot of this film focuses on their relationship, and it just isn't really there. It feels a little bit forced overall, and I wasn't really buying into their chemistry. The rest of the cast, though, again, not really that bad. Tyree Henry does what he can to try to make this work. Jean Smart is utterly wasted in this film. She really doesn't have that much to do. Again, really, everyone isn't that bad. And then there's James Corden, who I will say right now, I am a fan of James Corden. I don't think he's that bad of an actor. I feel like he gets a bad rep, but I'm normally not annoyed by him. I actually think that he can be a very talented actor. But it goes without saying that he is just absolutely insufferable in this movie. And again, I don't know if it's necessarily his fault, but they give him very little to work with as a character. He literally is playing a device that looks and speaks like James Corden, and it just gets really annoying very fast. His one emotion is just to talk really loudly like this and just be very whiny and talk down to like Carol all the time, and I just didn't buy it at all. I didn't think he did a good job here. It just got very annoying very quickly. It didn't really feel like he didn't really make this role feel like his own. There's nothing he really did here to stick it out, and I don't really understand why they chose James Corden out of everyone to play this device. I feel like there were far better actors you could have gone with. And again, not saying Corden's a bad actor. He's a capable actor, but like, I just don't understand why they decided to go with him here. It just felt like a very strange casting choice, and it just never really works at all. Again, the rest of the cast really isn't that bad. They're definitely not the worst thing about this movie. Now we get to the directing and the writing, though, which this is really where we get to the things that I do very much think brings down this movie. Ben Falcone's directing overall, I just don't think is very good here at all. I think the way that he directs this film, it's really not well done, and it's probably one of his worst directed films yet, because here's the thing, at least in some of his other films, I can say he knew what he wanted it to be. He has zero idea what he really wants this film to be. The film waffles a lot. It starts off as like a action comedy of sorts, and then it reverts in the second act to this very generic and boring like romantic comedy, and then it turns into a full-on like disaster movie, and none of it really comes together at all. It really feels like Falcone had like 3 different ideas, and he didn't know which one he really wanted to focus on, so he just tried to do it all at once, and it just comes across as very haphazard. It comes across as very messy, and overall it's just a hackneyed mess in terms of directing. So it's definitely some of his worst directing yet again. I always have thought he's a very weak director, but this has to be one of his worst. I mean, the comedy falls flat. Really, just everything falls flat here. Everything feels very phony in terms of his directing, and it's one of those things where, again, I think that he can be good. I think he's directing the wrong kind of movies, and I think just he didn't really have much passion in this film, very much at all, and it really does show here for sure, so I was not impressed by his directing. The screenplay here as well, though, leaves a lot to be desired. There's a lot of things that just really don't work within this film. I mean, one of them being just the story itself is absolutely ridiculous. The idea that there's this device out there, it's this superintelligence thing, and nobody really pays it any mind at first. Everyone is just kind of like, oh, it doesn't exist. It goes in a very stereotypical direction in that way. And for me, it was obvious the second that the superintelligence device came into play that, like, this is bad news. This is going to destroy us all. And the way that everyone acts around it, it just really annoyed me. They acted like there was nothing wrong with it. They were trying to, like, be civilized towards it. And it's like, no, this thing is going to kill you. Like, just try to, like, extract it as soon as you can, and then everything's going to be okay. And that was really bothering me. But the thing that bothers me more in this movie, and the thing that really surprises me, is that this film really does not have that much of a story. There really is not a lot that happens in this film. You look at our main character, for example, of Carol Peters, and again, no, she's not as annoying as some Melissa McCarthy's other characters, which I do appreciate, but there's just not really that much to her. She works as a corporate executive. She had a relationship with Bobby Cannavale that didn't really work out, and she wants to try to repair it, and she is the key to saving the world, and that's kind of it. Like, aside from that, we really don't know much about her at all, so it's very hard to latch onto her character. And the thing is, the film will often act like she's this, like, amazing person, and that I get the message that they're trying to go for. Like, people see her as average, but, like, there's a lot more about her, and I don't feel like the film, leans into that heavily enough to really justify, like, how Carol is going to save them. What is it about Carol that's so special? I just don't think the film does a good job of convincing us, and I very much was not convinced, and I just didn't care about her as a character. Nobody really in this movie I cared about. Bobby Cannavale, who is he? He's a guy that Carol used to date that likes like football players. He's a big fan of like he's a big fan of like football players, and that's really kind of it. There's not really like much else to him as a character, and their relationship because of that is just so incredibly uninteresting. There really is not much going on there with them as characters. They kind of like, they go on a date. It's supposed to be like, a very like casual date, and the two of them are going to end up together, and then they just kind of do, and there's no complications. Nothing really happens to like get in the way of it. Nothing is introduced. It's just a really weird screenplay in terms of that. And then when the film realizes it's reaching its climax, it very quickly reverts back to, again, being this very over the top like sci-fi comedy, and it just never really works because you don't really give a shit about anything that is going on, and I don't think the film does a very good job with that at all. The comedy also here is really bad. I can't really recall of a single time that I laughed in this movie. I thought the comedy was very LCD. It very much felt in line with the kind of stuff that McCarthy usually does in these kinds of movies. There's not really anything funny said here, especially when it's being uttered by the superintelligence device. They're trying way too hard to, like, make this thing very snarky, really make it the big, like, standout, and it's just not really working at all. There's a running gag in terms of, like, this song that, like, Carol likes to listen to, and I didn't get what was funny about it. Like, what was the joke here? I just really didn't understand it, and I didn't think they did a good job with that. So yeah, the screenplay here is just an absolute mess. There's really nothing that works in this film in terms of the screenplay, and I think that's very much what brings this down. The cinematography also is really, really bad here. This film looks very cheap. There are a lot of scenes that just are not very well constructed. A lot of bad CGI in the third act for sure. When the film tries to make everyone look like they're on these, like, surveillance type cameras, it just looks so phony, and it just doesn't look convincing, and none of it really works in terms of the cinematography. The device itself, the superintelligence device, again, it's very hard to understand, like, what it exactly is, like, what is the point of what it's doing here. I don't think the film really gives us an explanation there, aside from the fact that, like, it wants to take over the world and it has nefarious purposes. I don't think it does a good job with that really at all, so that didn't really work for me. The score here I thought was really bad too, and the editing, again, this film is such a mess in terms of editing. The way it cuts back and forth, especially in the third act, it just feels like two distinctly different movies. When we have Melissa McCarthy and Bobby Cannavale in this sweet romantic comedy, and then we cut back to, like, Brian Tyree Henry and Gene Smart and all these other, like, agents trying to take down this device, none of it feels like it's working. None of it feels like it's blending in. It doesn't fit seamlessly at all, and I just don't understand what they were really trying to do here in terms of this film. It all just felt like it was just it all just felt like it just got jumbled in, and none of it really flowed in the way that it wanted to. Also, the ending to this movie has to be one of the most anticlimactic things that I have seen in a very long time. The way that it wraps up, the way that it decides to go about it, just everything about the resolution of this movie really pissed me off. And honestly, I would have been happier if they would have just gone full, just fully nonsensical in the last act of this movie. If they would have just, like, gone into wacky shenanigans, I would have been fine with that. Like, if they would have had some, like, really batshit ending, that honestly would have been better than the really lame ending that we get here. I mean, it ends in the most, I think, again, the most laziest way possible, and it really just speaks to how little anything was done to make this movie interesting. Superintelligence is an incredibly boring film. It's a film that is very disjointed. It has actors that honestly aren't that bad, minus James Corden, who really is just very insufferable throughout this entire film. It has a lot of plot points that just don't really make a lot of sense, a lot of subplots that just don't really go much of anywhere. It doesn't seem to understand who its target audience is either. It'll flop between a sappy romantic comedy and then try to be something a little bit more sci-fi, and it just never really works at all. The story itself is very uninteresting, and just overall, it's another very generic and very unfunny and very low effort from Ben Falcone overall. I really hope Melissa McCarthy stops making these kinds of movies, because she is very talented, and I do think that she can give a great performance when she has the right talent, and she doesn't give a bad performance here. Like I said, she's not the worst part of this movie at all. She's giving a far more subdued performance than usual. It's just, again, she just doesn't really have much to work with, as does really anyone in this movie, and it just really speaks to just how little effort was contributed to this overall. Superintelligence is a very unfunny comedy, and I'm definitely going to give it a D. Oh man, HBO Max. I really hope Wonder Woman 1984 is a big hit for them because they really have not been delivering in terms of original content. I mean, The Flight Attendant is really good. I started that. That show's really good. And I've heard, there are other shows they have that are good, but like in terms of movies, like they really have not been succeeding. So I really hope that Wonder Woman is able to like propel them forward because, they have not been doing it for me so far.
Moving on.